Have you ever felt a hollow echo in the middle of a crowded room, as if every laugh around you was a reminder of the space inside that no one can reach? There's a quiet ache that doesn't announce itself in tears or shouts. Sometimes it shows up as a tight throat when you scroll through happy faces online, or as a sudden urge to disappear when someone asks, "How are you?" You smile, you say fine, and then the silence settles in again, heavy as stone. It's that silent ache you've been carrying, the one you're not supposed to talk about, because admitting it feels like admitting you aren't enough, that something inside you is broken, hidden away. I know you hear the voice that says you should be grateful, that you've got people who care, but you also hear the quiet whisper telling you that nobody truly knows the way your heart twists at night. And though you try to drown it out with music, with work, with scrolling, the ache follows you into dreams, where it's louder, more insistent. It's in those moments you realize that loneliness isn't just being alone. It's feeling unseen, unclaimed, as if your soul is a house with all the lights off. Today, we're going to sit with that ache. Not to lecture you, not to hand you a quick fix, but to look at the truth no one wants to hear. That loneliness is part of our human wiring, a wound that, when understood, can lead you back to who you truly are. Together, we'll breathe into those spaces you've been avoiding and let them speak. This isn't about filling the emptiness with noise or surface distractions. It's about finding the seed of connection hidden beneath the pain, the part of you waiting to be recognized, honored, and healed. If you've ever hit pause on life because the silence inside you felt too loud, or if you're tired of layering on words to hide how deep that feeling runs, stay here with me. I promise you gentle honesty, space to breathe, and a reminder that you're not alone in this. If you find yourself nodding, or your heart racing at the sound of truths you've been too afraid to touch, take a moment now. Subscribe and hit the like button so we can keep this conversation going, because your voice matters and this space exists for you. There's a part of you that's learned to move through life like a ghost, drifting past conversations without leaving a trace, because you've convinced yourself that showing up fully is too risky, that once people see the hollowness you carry, they'll slip away, leaving you stranded in the dark again. You've spent years perfecting this dance. Laugh at the right moment, offer empathy when someone else is hurting, but never let anyone get close enough to touch where it really hurts. And in the quiet aftermath of those encounters, you catch yourself wondering if you even belong here, in this world of connection everyone seems to talk about. You watch others share secrets, lean on one another, and you feel as though you're watching a movie through soundproof glass, seeing the light and motion but hearing nothing. It's a strange kind of heartbreak, to long for intimacy and also fear it with every ounce of your being. Maybe when you were a child, you learned without words that vulnerability meant pain. A parent's tears left you scrambling for explanations. A friend's betrayal carved out a chamber of distrust in your heart. You adapted, built walls so high that when you peeked over the top, the sky felt distant, unreachable. And yet, despite the self-made fortress, you carried a secret. You weren't all right. You worried someone would notice the cracks, the way your smile trembles at the edges, or the way your voice catches when you're asked to share what you really think. So you became an expert at masks, joyful, supportive, unbreakable, but each mask weighed you down a little more, until you could barely remember what it felt like to be unguarded. Here's the truth. Loneliness isn't about the number of people in your life. It's about the number of truths you've hidden away. You've learned to fill your days with obligations and busy work, convinced that if you stay moving, you won't have to face the hollow echo that follows you into every quiet moment. But the more you run from silence, from yourself, the more that part of you shrinks, dimming the brilliance that once made you unique. Somewhere beneath the fear and the shame, there's a spark waiting to be fanned into life, a part of you that still believes in belonging. It whispers in the stark moments before dawn, when the world holds its breath, and you feel an ache for something you cannot name. If you lean into that whisper, you'll find it speaks in fragments. You are worthy of being seen. Your pain has meaning. There is someone who would cherish your unfiltered truth, These aren't empty affirmations, they're echoes of the self you buried to survive. And breathing into them doesn't require grand gestures, it asks only that you pause. Feel the weight of your chest. Notice the rhythm of your pulse. Sit with the ache and let it speak. Let it tell you the story of how you survived every lonely night, every silent meal, every birthday that passed unnoticed. In those moments, you become both witness and participant in your own life, reclaiming the parts of yourself you thought lost. I'm not here to teach you how to connect. I'm here to remind you that connection already lives inside you, waiting for recognition. When you finally allow yourself to be seen by yourself first, the world around you shifts. You begin to notice small kindnesses, a stranger's genuine smile, an old friend's message that comes without expectation, the quiet understanding in another person's eyes when you share just a sliver of your truth. Each moment of realness chips away at the walls you built, until you stand not as a ghost, but as a soul alive with possibility. And so, breathe. Let the silence come, and instead of filling it with noise, let it expand around you like a horizon opening. Listen to what your loneliness has to tell you about the ways you've protected yourself, and about the parts of you still yearning for belonging. This is not a journey you take by stepping outside of yourself. It's an invitation to return home to who you've always been, beneath the layers of fear. Trust that your story matters, that your quiet ache is sacred, and that in honoring it, you make room for the true connections you've been starving for. There was a night not long ago when you lay awake, staring at the ceiling so long that the cracks in the paint became constellations of your own, making maps tracing every disappointment, every unanswered question you buried beneath polite smiles. You reached for your phone, expecting distraction, but every screen felt like a mirror reflecting that same emptiness inside. You realized in that moment that the thing you feared most wasn't being alone, it was the way loneliness had taught you to doubt your own presence, like you'd been quietly erased from the story of your life. And yet, even as your chest tightened, a small voice stirred, reminding you of moments when another soul eased that isolation. A teacher's nod of understanding, a stranger's soft, "I hear you." The warmth of a friend who stayed on the line until your tears ran out. Those moments flicker like distant lanterns, proof that connection isn't an all-or-nothing deal. It can come in glimpses, breath by breath. You begin to understand that healing doesn't arrive with a grand revelation. It unfolds through tiny ruptures in the walls you built. Imagine each stone you stacked to keep pain out becoming a pillow where you can lay your vulnerability down for a moment. The first stones to loosen might be the ones you barely noticed. The sigh you let slip when you thought no one was listening. The hand you almost reached out when you felt utterly alone. These are not weaknesses but invitations threads leading you back to the knitted tapestry of human hearts. And so, you practice saying one small truth. I'm not okay. You whisper it in the dark until it feels less like a confession and more like a breath. A simple exchange between you and the quiet room. In doing so, you dismantle a barrier that has kept your truest self hidden for too long. As you gather courage to speak that truth into the world, you'll notice how the river of empathy starts to flow. Someone will pause mid-sentence to ask, "Are you really all right?" And you won't snap it away with a practiced, "Yeah, I'm fine." Instead, you'll let the question rest on your lips and feel the pulse of your own heartbeat answering it. You might send a message to someone you trust. "I'm struggling tonight." You might share a photo of your empty coffee mug, the stain on the rim a silent confession of sleepless hours. And in each of these acts, you're reclaiming space, not just for your pain, but for your truth. You're telling the world, "I belong here, even when I ache." And when you claim that belonging, the world will shift around you, offering compassion you didn't dare hope for. It's in these small openings that real connection takes root. Picture a garden fragile and wild, where flowers push through the soil in unlikely places. Your vulnerability is the seed. Compassion from another is the rain. Shared stories are sunlight. At first, it may feel raw, like exposing a wound to the breeze, but that breeze carries oxygen, healing air. You begin to share pieces of your journey. The night you stayed silent when you needed to scream, the morning you thanked yourself for showing up anyway, the afternoon you realized that loneliness had taught you how to survive, not how to live. With each confession, you loosen the grip of shame and widen the path for empathy to march in. You feel the warmth of witness, the gentle gravity of someone's attention cradling your truth. And then comes the subtle shift. You wake one morning without the familiar knot in your gut. The silence isn't a cavern anymore. It's a space you've filled with presence. You notice that when you walk into a room, you're no longer a ghost. Your weight, your voice, your laughter have substance. Loneliness still visits, old friends don't disappear overnight, but you greet it differently, as a messenger rather than a monster. You incline your head toward its lessons, what parts of you still need care, where you've hidden your longing for love. And because you've practiced opening up, you no longer carry that longing alone. It flows between hearts, a shared current, reminding you that to be human is to sometimes be lonely, and that loneliness can guide you toward the most profound connections of your life. In the quiet that follows, you'll notice a gentle tug toward the people who have lingered at the edges of your life, those you once dismissed as too busy or too far away. You send a text that begins with nothing more than, "I miss you." Your fingers hesitate over the keys, because you're opening a door you've kept locked for years. You hit send and your heart flutters, a mix of dread and hope that maybe, just maybe, someone on the other side understands what it means to hold your own emptiness and still reach across the void. When the reply comes, "I've been thinking of you too," you feel a warmth seep into your bones, as if that simple acknowledgement rekindles a part of you you thought had burned out. It's not a thunderclap of relief, but a soft pulse, steady and true, reminding you that belonging begins with being seen. And so you begin to practice little rituals of presence. You light a candle at dawn and breathe into its flame, asking yourself before anyone else, "How are you really?" You trace the curve of your own smile in the mirror, speaking kindly to the reflection that once shocked you with its emptiness. Each morning, you open the curtains not only to let sunlight in, but to greet the day as an old friend returning home. These acts may seem small, too simple to count as progress, but they're the grains of sand that forge a shoreline of self-trust. Every time you honor your own need for comfort, you're teaching yourself that your worth doesn't depend on another's approval. In these moments, memories rise of times when loneliness transformed into creativity. You recall the midnight pages you filled with half-formed poems, the sketches you abandoned at dawn, the melodies you hummed without thinking anyone would listen. You realize that your solitude, though painful, was never empty. It was fertile ground for your deepest self to surface. You begin to see that the ache in your chest was a signal, not a sentence, an invitation to gather the fragments of your heart and weave them into something luminous. You open an old journal, hesitant at first, then with growing wonder as the words flow. I survived the nights when no one whispered my name. I survived the mornings when my shadow was my only companion. Writing these lines feels like exhaling a weight you've carried for lifetimes. From this creative spark, you reach out to someone else hurting in silence. You share a line you've written just a fragment and watch as their eyes fill with recognition. You're no longer alone in your ache. Your honesty has become a bridge. As they send back their own words, unpolished and trembling, you feel a bond stronger than any you've known. It isn't the absence of pain that makes this moment sacred. It's the willingness to show your wound and trust that it will be cradled, not judged. In that exchange, you touch the essence of belonging. It grows when you trade perfection for presence, when you decide that honesty, however fragile, is more powerful than any mask. And then a remarkable shift happens in the way you walk through the world. You carry your heart more openly, not as an exposed sore, but as a guiding compass. You begin to notice the eyes that flicker with understanding, the exhale in a stranger's shoulders when you stop pretending. You offer a nod, a smile, a genuine, "I feel that too," when someone speaks of feeling unseen. These small gestures ripple outward, forging connections you never planned for. A colleague plucks courage from your example and confesses their own silent ache. A neighbor, inspired by your morning candle ritual, shares a sunrise photograph with you. Compassion circles back in unexpected ways, like rivers converging into an ocean of shared humanity. Yet loneliness is a shapeshifter, returning in new forms. The ache of change, the fear of loss, the echo of old wounds. You learn not to fear its return, but to meet it with the same openness you trained your heart to hold. When it comes, you greet it as an old friend with complicated love. You acknowledge the lessons it brought: self-reliance, empathy, the courage to seek connection. You breathe into the emptiness and listen, because even in its sharpest moments, loneliness carries a message about where your heart still needs tending. In embracing that message, you become a storyteller of your own journey, not by crafting grand narratives, but by sharing the simple truth of your days. The mornings you woke with hopeful hearts, the nights you sent a single word and waited for a reply, the afternoons you wrote a poem that only you read. Your story threads into the stories of others, weaving a tapestry where every loneliness becomes a point of light, guiding you toward compassion both for yourself and for the strangers in every crowded room. In the hush of an ordinary afternoon, you find yourself paused before a window, the world outside moving with effortless purpose. As if it knows where it's going, even the leaves drifting on the breeze seem to have direction. You touch a fingertip to the glass, and suddenly you feel weightless, suspended between the life you've been living and the one you're beginning to imagine. You realize that for so long, you've been trying to force things, forced laughter at gatherings, forced comfort in rituals that never settled the ache, forced connections with people who didn't see you. But what if the real magic lies not in forcing, but in allowing? What if you could lean into the spaces between breaths and let life find you? You remember the first time you allowed just that, a morning last spring when instead of reaching for your phone, you stepped outside barefoot on grass, still damp with dew. The cool blades tickled your toes, and you closed your eyes, inhaling the crisp air. No expectations, no agenda, just presence. And in that quiet moment, your heart whispered something you hadn't heard in years. You are here. You are alive. You are enough. It felt like coming home after a long, exhausting journey, where every step had been measured by fear. But that morning, every blade of grass under your feet was a reminder that growth often happens in the small, unseen moments. From that realization, you begin to weave presence into your days. You slow down at the break of dawn to watch the sky shift from ink blue to rose gold, letting the color seep into your chest. You carry a notebook, simple, unassuming, and you jot down one feeling at a time. The warmth of sunlight on your forearm, the ache of missing someone who no longer calls, the thrill of surprise when a bird lands on your windowsill. These fragments aren't grand declarations. They're the stitches holding your heart back together. You replay them in your mind when you feel the old emptiness creep in, and you find that even on the hardest days, there is a glimmer, a pulse that reminds you life still courses through your veins. And then, connection begins to blossom in places you never expected. You strike up a conversation with the barista whose name you never knew, asking not about her day, but about what made her smile that morning. She looks startled, then softens, and suddenly the familiar clink of cups behind the counter becomes a chorus of warmth. You volunteer at a local community garden, tending to seedlings that remind you of your own tender roots. You listen to the stories of old hands, and the dirt stories of longing, loss, and the fierce joy that comes from growth. With each shared anecdote, you feel the invisible thread weaving you into a wider tapestry of belonging. In those exchanges, you realize that vulnerability is contagious. A neighbor, emboldened by your openness about feeling unseen, invites you into her home for tea and confession. She tells you about nights she spent staring at the ceiling, too anxious to sleep. You nod, and without planning, you offer her one of your journal pages, a short poem about discovering worth in silence. She reads it, eyes glistening, and you understand that your pain, once hidden, has become a gift. It breathes life into another's loneliness, showing them they're not alone. Back at home, you return to the journal entries you've scattered like breadcrumbs. You read aloud the lines you once whispered only to yourself. I found a spark in yesterday's tears. I dreamed of handholds in the dark and woke to dawn's soft glow. Each phrase resonates with a deeper truth. Your journey wasn't about erasing loneliness, but about learning to carry it like a companion, one that reminds you to seek light in unexpected corners. When the ache returns, and it will, you now greet it not with panic, but with curiosity. What is this longing telling me today? Where does it want to guide me? As your practice deepens, you discover that your story has power beyond your imagination. You begin to record your voice, softly reading lines from your journal and early morning videos. Your tone is gentle, unforced, and it feels less like a performance and more like a letter to someone in the dark. You speak of simple rituals, brewing coffee with intention, closing your eyes under the sun, naming the emotion that wells up without judgment. You invite listeners to breathe with you, to sit with discomfort, to let tears be a language of healing. And they respond. Messages pour in from people who feel seen for the first time, who thank you for giving voice to what they believed was unshareable. In that communion, you witness the power of shared vulnerability. A woman on the other side of the screen writes that your words stopped her from giving up. A man thanks you for reminding him that strength can come in admitting weakness. You realize that the ache you once sought to bury has become a bridge connecting hearts across coffee tables, sidewalks, and living rooms. The loneliness you carried is no longer a sentence but a shared pulse, a rhythm that binds you to the heartbeat of humanity. And through it all, you've learned that the truth no one wants to hear about loneliness is not that it's a curse to be banished, but that it's an invitation to deeper presence, to radical honesty, and to creating the gentle connections that light the darkest nights. You've become both storyteller and listener, weaving your journey into a tapestry where every raw confession becomes a spark of hope. In embracing your solitude, you discovered that belonging isn't found in crowds, but in the tender honesty of being fully, beautifully human. And then you notice how the world begins to mirror your new stance. The rain that once felt like a reminder of every tear you'd swallowed now sounds like a lullaby, each drop drumming a soft invitation to rest. You pause at a cafe window as people rush past, hoods up, heads down, and suddenly you don't feel apart from them, you feel alongside them, part of a shared movement. In that moment, you understand that loneliness and belonging are two sides of the same coin. One reaches inward, the other reaches outward, and both are necessary to feel fully alive. You remember the first time you spoke at a small gathering, your voice trembling as you shared a piece of your story. You expected awkward silence, judgment, or pity, but instead, you were met with nods, with tears, with hands gently touching your arm. You realized that your vulnerability had offered others permission to be vulnerable too. It was as if every story you told was a thread that wove you into a community of hearts that beat together, quietly at first, then swelling into a chorus of shared truth. With each telling, you sharpen your clarity. You begin to see patterns in your loneliness. It flares when you neglect your own needs, when you forget the rituals that anchor you, when you isolate yourself in the myth of strong alone. So you build new habits. An evening walk where you let your thoughts wander without judgment. A weekly call to someone you once loved but lost touch with. A ritual of lighting incense when you feel the old fears crawling back. You learn that caring for your inner world is as vital as breathing air. It's the oxygen that fuels your capacity to connect, to love, to create. And create you do. You pick up the guitar gathering dust in the corner, and as your fingers find the strings, the ache that once felt immobilizing becomes fuel for melody. You record a simple song, a few chords, a whispered confession, and share it. Frightened, but resolute. The responses flood in. Messages from people who played it on sleepless nights, who sang it in their cars, who found comfort in its raw honesty. You realize that every note you strum, every word you sing, is a lamp lit in someone else's dark. In time, you wake one morning to find that your loneliness has shifted again, softer now, like an old companion who's lost its power to throw you into despair. You feel its presence, but you also feel the strength you've built, a heart seasoned by truth, a soul lit by community, a mind clear enough to recognize when you're slipping back into old habits. Now, you meet every silent ache, not with panic, but with a gentle inquiry. What part of me needs attention today? How can I bring warmth to this cool corner of my heart? And in those answers, you discovered the greatest gift of all, that belonging isn't a place you arrive at, it's a way you choose to live. In the soft afterglow of your own transformation, you wake to mornings where your breath comes easily, where the quiet doesn't feel empty, but like an invitation to remember the sacred rhythm of being alive. You walk through your day carrying the gentle truth that loneliness was never meant to isolate you, but to guide you inward towards self-compassion, presence, and honest connection. You've learned that sharing a tremor of vulnerability can light up another's darkness, that every whispered confession becomes a shared heartbeat, weaving strangers into family. When you pause now, whether in the hush before dawn or the stillness after dusk, you honor the ache and the space it's taught you to fill with love. Love for yourself and the imperfect, beautiful lives intersecting your own. You nod at the barista who greets you by name, and when they smile in recognition, you feel a quiet gratitude for the simple grace of being seen. You reach out to someone who once drifted away, sending a line that says, "I've missed you," knowing that courage is nothing more than choosing hope over fear. If this gentle truth has touched you, if you recognize your own story in these words, let's keep walking together. Subscribe for more moments of honest reflection, share this with someone who needs to know they belong, and like the video so we can continue building a circle where every heartbeat matters. Thank you for being here, for breathing with me, and for trusting that even our deepest wounds can become the bridges to belonging.